Report of European Union Withdrawal Number 6 Bill. Lord Rooker.
My Lords, I beg to move that this report be now received.
The question is that this report be now received. As many as are of that opinion will say content. Contrary, not content. The content's have it. In Clause 1, Amendment 1, Lord Forsyth of Drumlene.
My Lords, I don't want to detain the House in any way, but no, seriously. But it may be of assistance to your Lordships if I explain why I put down this amendment. And it arises actually from an exchange which we had at the earlier committee stage of the bill, where my noble and learned friend, Lord Mackay of Clashfern, queried why the letter which the Prime Minister is required to send under the schedule to this bill did not include a reason. And we had an exchange about if you had to have a reason, surely that would be a condition. And he said the reason is in the bill. And the reason is indeed in the bill, and it's the bit that I want to take out. It's page 2, line 14, from 220 to the end of line 20. And I'm not sure how many of your Lordships have actually studied this and thought about the implications of it. It's written, of course, in language which makes it less easy to understand. But essentially, what it's saying is that I'll read it. It says that the letter has to be sent in order to debate and pass a bill to implement the agreement between the United Kingdom and the European Union under Article 52 of the Treaty on European Union, including provisions reflecting the outcome of inter-party talks as announced by the Prime Minister on the 21st of May 2019, and in particular the need for the United Kingdom to secure changes to the political declaration to reflect the outcome of those inter-party talks. So that means that we're asking the Prime Minister to send a letter not only saying that he wants to debate the May deal and the subsequent matters that were agreed between the parties, but also that he intends to pass a bill when the Prime Minister has made it absolutely clear that he is determined not to do that, and more particularly, for those members who've argued about the supremacy of the House of Commons, it is a deal which has been rejected by the House of Commons on 3 separate occasions. So here we have a piece of legislation which, by agreement between the front benches, is being given safe passage, and I don't wish to I certainly don't support the bill, but I certainly don't wish to delay it if that is what the government wants. But what on earth is going on with the government? Why have the government not tabled an amendment to take this out? Because it does not reflect the government's declared policy, nor does it reflect the view that the House of Commons has taken on 3 separate occasions. And so I went to have a look at the Hansard of the House of Commons to find out how this had got into this bill. And it's got into this bill by accident. The Labour Party's position in the other place was to abstain on this matter. And I'm the author of it, showing that some families stick together, was a certain Stephen Kinnock. And it said, and at column 262, my noble friend Lord Cormac says he's a good chap. I know we're a broad church, but at columns 262 of the 4th of September, he is quoted as saying, on this matter, I understand that our position at the present time would be to abstain, and I'm not 100% sure of that. So what happened was that the promoters of this bill, my noble and learned friend Lord Mackay, corrected me quite correctly at committee stage. I said it was the government that had failed to put in tellers for the division. And of course, I'm confused because in my day, it was only the government that actually proposed business motions and matters of that kind. But of course, it was the promoters of this bill who failed to provide tellers for the bill, which is how this has ended up in the bill. So we have in that section of the bill a provision which the Labour Party did not want, they were going to abstain on, and the government can't possibly have wanted. And I'm as good as my word. I said I wouldn't seek to delay the implementation of this legislation if that is what has been agreed between the parties. But it does strike me as extraordinary, and I did not table an amendment at the committee stage, which I would have done in the normal way, because I expected the government to put down an amendment to deal with this, and the government have not done so. And I have to say to my noble friend, I would be very grateful indeed if he could explain why the government are leaving in a bill which they are proposing to support a provision which requires the Prime Minister to give an which requires the Prime Minister to write a letter for the purpose of giving an undertaking to debate and pass a bill to implement the May compromise, so-called, agreement, and also the discussions that took place between the Prime Minister and the previous Prime Minister and the Labour Party, which include giving assurances about regulatory requirements and the rest. It does seem very extraordinary, and that is the reason behind the amendment which I beg to move.
In clause 1, page 2, line 14, leave out from 2020 to end of line 20.
My Lords, I very much hope that the House will not be seduced by the silver tongue of my noble friend, Lord Mackay of Drumleys. He... That was... I apologise profusely to my noble friend, and of course nobody could possibly confuse an erudite lawyer with... My Lords, it is, I think, important that this bill goes through as it came from the House of Commons. And I say that for one reason above all others, and that is that I believe that this particular Kinnock amendment gives an opportunity to bring to a seemly end the wrangling, the disputes that have taken place. There are many in your Lordship's House, in all parts of this House, who would have supported the Theresa May deal. And that was made plain in debate after debate. We never had the opportunity specifically to divide on it. But it was quite clear that a large number of very influential crossbenchers, a large number of my friends on the other side of the House, and on this side of the House too, would have accepted it. And I believe it would have been a sensible decision. And of course, in the other House, we must remind ourselves that when it came up for the third time of asking, Mr. Boris Johnson, not then the Prime Minister, voted for it. Mr. Rees-Mogg voted for it. And the government in its entirety voted for it. I know there was a great clear-out of the government, but it really is entirely reasonable that people should have had a chance to reflect after a change of leader, seeing the stark reality of falling off the cliff of no deal, that we should have a chance to revisit this, not least because my noble friend, the Minister, and I'm delighted that he's on the front bench at the moment, my noble friend, the Minister, has repeatedly said this very week how hard he had fought to get the May deal through. And indeed he did, and I gave him constant support throughout those debates. And my Lords, therefore, this is no backtracking, it's a recognition of what we can do to bring this long three-year saga to a decent end. And then we can move forward to a general election in due time, having agreed with our friends and allies in the European Union the terms of exit. And I remind honourable lords, noble lords in all parts of the House, that, as I've used the words before, this is only the beginning of the beginning. There are many, many long months and years ahead of negotiating, but it would be far better to negotiate from a base of amity and accord than from a base of discord. And that could well be the chance, indeed would be the case, if we came out without a deal, because acrimony would be the prevailing emotion, and that's not a good thing. My lords, I hope my noble friend, Lord Forsyth, will not have succeeded on this occasion in seducing you with his silver tongue, and I beg to oppose this amendment.
My Lords, I raised the issue yesterday of the opportunities that rest within the political declaration for a solution to the problem which the country faces may be there. The offer from the Commission is still open for the government of the day to have negotiations and discussions on finding a way through on the backstop linked to the political declaration. And I asked the Minister twice yesterday why, as yet, the government have not yet taken up the opportunity of embarking on a negotiation along those lines to try to find a way through, which in turn would link with the deal negotiated by Mrs May. If, as Lord Forsyth wishes, he spotted it, we take this out, that prevents that opportunity. It prevents that opportunity being in the bill with the opportunity of taking it forward. So those of us who are looking for a way through, who are being prepared to shift the grounds to a degree, to find the accommodation, to try to get some healing of the divisions which exist, should be very vigorously indeed opposing what Lord Forsyth presents to you, asking the Minister and the Government to pick up the opportunity offered by the Commission to negotiate on the political declaration there and find a way forward. And then, in turn, we should be getting this bill through the House very quickly today as the basis of moving forward.
My Lords, I'd like to support my noble friend Lord Forsyth. I'm rather surprised by Lord Cormac because he's always been a great champion of the revising powers of this chamber. And when there's a bill that comes before us, which clearly has got a clause in it which is a complete mistake, and then the proposers of the bill didn't even intend it to be there, surely it is our job to send it back to the Commons, who've already organised to accept Lord's amendments on Monday, and they can then accept my noble friend's amendment, and it'll go through anyway. It won't delay the bill, it won't make the slightest difference. It'll actually make the bill better than it is already. And I think it's quite extraordinary that when a mistake has been made like this, and it's widely acknowledged by everybody that this was a mistake, it was because the proposers of the bill didn't put in tellers. Seems to be a bit amateur, in my opinion, but there we are. That's what they did. That we are not in a position to put the bill right and to actually concur with the wishes of the other place, who will then pass the amendment in the other place, and nothing will change in terms of the timing or anything else. So I can't understand why my noble friend Lord Forsyth's amendment has been resisted in any way whatsoever.
The noble lord say that this was a mistake, and I'm just curious about how he knows it was a mistake. Has he got some inside knowledge, not just gossip?
Have the inside knowledge that the Labour Party wanted to abstain on this, and there was no way this amendment would have been carried if tellers hadn't been put through by the proposers of the bill.
My Lords, I wasn't intending to intervene. However, I seem to have become very swiftly a member that this House doesn't want to hear from. And that, my Lords, my Lords, has been confirmed because this House does not care for certain inconvenient truths or truths. My Lords, I only rise to say that In 22 years in the service of this House, first in usual channels and then having the honour to be a member of the House, I have never made the practice of commenting publicly on usual channels discussions, and I do not do so now. The only thing that I will say, for the record, should be placed on the record, is at a certain significant hour, in the small hours of Thursday morning, it was my understanding that this amendment would, by agreement, be removed. My Lords, that was clearly a misunderstanding.
My Lords, I would have preferred not to see the Kinnock Amendment in the bill, whether or not it was a mistake. As the noble Lord Kerr pointed out in committee, it's not open to the European Union to impose conditions on an extension, and the suggestion of the purpose that is sought to be removed by this amendment suggests that there could be conditions. It is certainly not possible for the European Union to impose conditions on the conduct of the British government during the period of any extension. But if you read the words that are sought to be removed that were in the Kinnock Amendment, they are so woolly as to be meaningless. They refer to the outcome of cross-party talks that was uncertain, and the talks indeed were abandoned. And I believe, along with the promoters of the bill in the House of Commons and here, that the words of the Kinnock Amendment would have no legal effect whatever. I say to the noble Lords, Lord Cormac and Lord Brooke of Overthorpe, that there is nothing whatever in this bill as it stands to prevent the negotiation of a deal by the government if that were negotiated and if it were then passed through the House of Commons. But the central point here is that we have to live with the Kinnock Amendment. We need to vote against Lord Forsyth's amendment because we are under the time constraints of the prorogation. Yeah. Whatever Lord Hamilton says about the opportunity that there may be on Monday morning, we cannot foretell what might happen in the Commons on Monday morning if we sent back amendments, and I therefore urge the House to reject this amendment, which will not affect the central thrust of the bill in any way.
So tolerant of democracy. Could I rise and support Lord Forsyth's suggested amendment on one reason only? And that is that there is not a small businesswoman or a small businessman in this land who hasn't had this place and the other place up to here. And they just want everybody to get on with it and give the businesses of the land that generate the profit, that pay the tax, that build the schools and hospitals, the chance to get on and make money, employ people, pay tax. They hold us all in very high disrepute at the moment. All of us. The political class have let this country down and they've let business down, and that is not a partisan point. We should, all of us, of every party in both places, look into our souls about what we have done to this country in so many ways. If these people who have had us in such high disregard actually thought that we spent a Friday afternoon accepting the fact that something that is factually inaccurate we just knocked through on the nod, they would think we were even worse than they think right now. I thought that my noble Lord Brooke's point was excellent. I thought the chance of coming together, the chance of healing, you used the word, and I thought it was excellent, has a lot of merit in it. But we surely cannot actually knowingly vote for something which is just factually wrong. And on that basis, I would support the amendment. I don't think it will hold up anything on Monday. But then we ought to go from this place after this debacle is over and just start trying to have respect to the optics that the businesses of this country, the businesswomen and businessmen, the good people of this country have had enough of us. And if we don't start communicating with them as to why we are on their side, then God help us.
think it's just right to say that this amendment proposed to delete what's in the bill strikes me as rather unnecessary, apart from the fact that we have difficulty in time. But in my view, this amendment proposed by Mr. Stephen Kinnock, distinguished member of a distinguished family, was perfectly in order. And the fact that in the procedures of the House of Commons it has gone into the bill and is in the bill that we have read for the second time and which we have passed in committee stage and now on report stage strikes me as perfectly in order. Now, it says that it makes the important distinction, which I've tried to make yesterday, between the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration. And it has always seemed to me that the Irish backstop has really of the character of a future relationship. What's objected to is the fact that it's permanent or said to be permanent and so on. And that's part of the future relationship. And therefore I've always felt that the backstop is not of itself an objection to the withdrawal agreement as such. There may be other objections, but so far as the backstop is concerned, it is part of the future relationships in the aspect of it to which objection has been taken. And therefore, I would welcome the idea that the House of Commons had a discussion separating out these two, which the Kinnock Amendment does with complete accuracy. And I don't believe for a minute that it doesn't make sense. I think it's perfectly readable and perfectly understandable, even for lawyers. Now, in my view, therefore, this should stay in. My noble friend says he expected the government to object to it. The government are not for the whole of this bill. I mean, the whole thing is a private member's bill by a group which were not part of the government as such. They may have included members who were previously in the government, but at any rate, it's not a government bill, and therefore it's the government that don't care for it at all. So why they should have to amend or propose an amendment to a particular part of it, I don't know. I think it's perfectly right that they hadn't done so. I understand that they've been advised that it's meaningless. I don't agree with that, and I don't think anybody who reads it will think it's meaningless. It's perfectly clear what's wanted. And I think it's the foundation, in a proper sense, of the basis on which an extension is asked for. Now, it's said that, in accordance with Lord Kerr's formulation, that no conditions are attached. But I think if you apply for an extension, the European Union require a reason, which seems to be perfectly good common sense. And if you give a reason, good faith suggests that that is the reason. And therefore, it seems to me that it promotes the likelihood that something may suddenly emerge which distinguishes between the political formulation and the withdrawal agreement, which is really the vital thing to get through in time.
Perhaps it would be helpful for the House if I say a few words about this amendment. Let me say initially that both my noble friends, Lord Forsyth and Lord True, are essentially correct, except in one important detail. And let me say to Lord True that even if the rest of the House doesn't want to hear from him, I do, because I think he speaks a lot of good sense on these issues. It is perfectly true that originally, at some late hour on Wednesday evening, it was, and it's a fast-moving event, it was our intention to ask the House to remove this amendment. But since then, we've looked at it further, and what Lord Forsyth said, which is not correct, is that the government absolutely does not support this bill, and we do not favour it. We think it is flawed, and we think that this Kinnock Amendment tries, but does not succeed, to make it even worse. The amendment is confusingly drafted. It is contradictory to the aims of the rest of the bill, and its deficiencies are such that the effect is rendered pointless. Now, I hesitate always to disagree with my noble friend Lord Mackay, but certainly my strong advice is that this amendment is legally inoperable. It appears to be contradictory with other parts of the bill because it requires an extension to pass legislation to implement a deal when, of course, under this bill, the extension is only being sought because no deal has been agreed. So for all those reasons, as I said, we think it's inoperable and largely pointless. But I am happy to say that it was our original intention to take it out, and indeed we had discussions to that effect, so Lord True is absolutely correct, as always, but since then we've looked at the matter further.
My Lords, I'm grateful to the Noble Lord the Minister for helping the House at this stage explain what the government's position is. We don't support this amendment, and in short, and the Noble Lord the Minister has now said it, given the view that the government has taken that the Kinnock Amendment is in fact legally inoperable, it does no harm to keep it in the bill, and therefore we see no reason. I don't know why Noble Lords are laughing, because the critical point which was made by Lord Cormac is that the bill has to pass. We do not have the time to send anything back. No, we do not have the time to send it back to the House of Commons, given the guillotine of prorogation imposed by the Prime Minister.
My Lords, in principle, Lord Forsyth makes a very seductive case, and I say in principle. Lord Cormac made the point about the House of Commons might want to look at it again. I don't see any contradiction, the fact they rejected the deal 3 times. If they wished, it's their choice. It's the meaningful vote is theirs, not ours. And it's a soft Brexit. It's Brexit in name only. No question about it. And they are free anytime they wanted, the Commons, to fix their business to do it. Nothing to do with us, because we're not part of the meaningful vote process. So it's not our job in that way to manipulate the way they organise their business on an issue that we have got nothing to do with. So in some ways, it grieves me to say that we can't do our proper scrutiny. And I have to say, there is a complete breakdown of trust. Just because the government says there'll be time in the Commons on Monday to deal with this bill, any amendment sent down there can be amended. And something in lieu can come back. The idea that this is a sewn deal, forget it. Trust has broken down. The prorogation guillotine is there. We have no choice. And therefore, I ask the Noble Lord Forsyth if he'd be kind enough to withdraw his amendment.
Oh, my goodness. I have to say to the Noble Lord Rooker, whom I have great admiration for, that I'm struggling with that response, because what the words say is that the letter should be sent requesting an extension by the Prime Minister in order to not just debate, but to debate and pass a bill. That he has to send a letter saying he wants an extension because he's planning to pass a bill to implement the May Agreement, which has been rejected 3 times. And indeed, the Noble Lord Brooker's absolutely right, and to put in place the results of the discussions, which I don't have the information on other than what I've read in the newspapers, can be implemented. Now, that is anticipating the decisions by the House of Commons. However, Lord Cormac, in his response, he said that he supported the May deal, and there were many people who supported the May deal, but the May deal was rejected by the biggest vote ever in the other place. The Noble Lord Brooke, he said it prevents us from, and I think he's got a very good point here about the political agreement, about having discussions, and I think he may be right in his criticism that not enough has been done to take that part of the thing forward. But taking out this defective part of the bill doesn't prevent discussions being placed. And I think my noble friend Lord Hamilton made an absolutely crucial point, which is, if the thing's deficient and everybody agrees it's deficient, what is this House for? if it's not actually to deal with those matters? And when the Lord Rooker says that you can't trust, that there's a matter of trust, well, I wouldn't. My noble friend, Lord True, said that I'm most grateful to my noble friend, Lord Callanan, for his honesty and transparency. We were under the impression that the deal agreed between the front benches would result in this matter being taken out, and he has confirmed that. And we're now being told it's not being taken out because the legal advice is that it wouldn't fly anyway. So we put into the bill something which is legally deficient, and that's okay, and that's what this House has come to. And we do that because we don't believe that the government will be as good as their word when the people who were on the other side of the agreement have not been as good as their word. Well, I'm sorry, I hope that the government is rather better than that. And we have a duty here to pass legislation which is proper. Now, I am not a lawyer, but Lord Marx, in his contribution to this debate, told us that it would have no legal effect whatsoever. And my noble friend, the Lord Mackay of Clashfern, not Drumlin, he gave us the opposite advice. So there is at least some doubt, it would appear, as to whether or not it would have legal effect. My noble and learned friend, Lord Mackay, said it wasn't meaningless. And Lord Marx said he agreed that, I hope I'm not pushing too far here, he agreed it should not be there, but because it was meaningless, it could stay there. And the noble Lord Jones told us that the entire country was sick to death with all of this. Well, on that, I'm sure we can all agree. Yeah. We are.
Well, I'm going to ask you this question, though, even so. I'm going to, because the noble Lord has questioned the comments that have been made about trust. I wonder if he wanted, in that context, to comment on what the Prime Minister said this morning, which was that he said that he will not seek an extension, even if it's passed in law. Does that change his view on whether there is a question of trust that is at play here?
No, it doesn't change my view, because what the Prime Minister says he will or will not do has nothing whatever to do with what the law of the land is. And here... and he has made it... What he says he will do has nothing whatever to do with what the law of the land is as decided by both Houses of Parliament. And I would expect every single parliamentarian to obey the law of the land. And there is a responsibility on us, therefore, to ensure in passing the law that there is absolute clarity about what it means and what it does. And for this House, and particularly for the noble Lord with his vast experience, when his own party were not prepared to vote for this matter, they were going to abstain on it. And when it only came into the bill because tellers were not put in by the amateurs at the other end who'd taken control of the agenda, for him to suggest that we should leave it in, whilst at the same time making that point, I think makes my argument.
Noble Lord for giving way. Is the Noble Lord really saying that after we had the assurance yesterday from the Noble Lord, Lord Callanan and the Minister, in response to the Noble Lord, Lord Goldsmith, that the government would fully comply with this bill once it becomes an act? Not only would it get royal assent, but the government would comply. But almost simultaneously, the Prime Minister was saying he'd be dead in a ditch before he sent an extension. Does the Noble Lord think that we should rely on the Noble Lord, the Minister's assurance on behalf of the government, while the Prime Minister is saying something completely different? Does that not undermine trust, not only in the Prime Minister, but in the assurance we got from the Minister yesterday?
I'm so tired of this political argy-bargy. If the Prime Minister is dead in a ditch, he's not the government. And we are at this stage in considering these proceedings. We are talking about ensuring that we have clear and effective law. And that is why I put down this amendment. And I have to say to my noble friend Lord Callanan, he didn't really give me a satisfactory answer, although I appreciate the answer he gave me, when he said that the government had decided that they weren't, after all, going to take this out because they'd had advice that it wouldn't have any effect. Advice which is contrary to what we've heard from perhaps our most distinguished former Lord Chancellor. So I'm sorry, but I do not wish my name to be associated with legislation passed by this House which is defective, and I intend to test the opinion of the House.
Is Amendment 1 be agreed to? As many as are of that opinion will say content. Contrary, not content?
Not content!
I think the not content have it. Clear the bar. The question is that Amendment 1 be agreed to. As many as are of that opinion will say content. Contrary, not content.
Not content!
The contents will go to the right by the throne, the not contents to the left by the bar. The question is that Amendment 1 be agreed to.
That's a surprise.
My Lords, there have voted contents 47, not contents 268. So the not contents have it. In Clause 5, Amendment 2, Lord True.
My Lords, if I may, my Lords, I would start by saying that when an agreement is reached in usual channels, in my view, that agreement is an agreement that must hold. Not only was an agreement made in usual channels, but I also, in the course of that, gave personal assurances that there would be no effort made to delay the progress of this bill, and I stand by that assurance. I didn't take any part yesterday, and I do not intend, and I hope this will not be made the occasion of a prolonged debate. The debate we've just had took no more than 3/4 of an hour. I would hope that this one, it's up to members of the House whether they're interested in the remarks I'm about to make, but I would hope, my Lords, that it's not the occasion of a very prolonged debate, and without being discourteous to any member of your Lordship's House, if it does appear that it is tending in that direction, I will try to rise to, or hope that the Noble Lord Rooker will rise, and I would support that, to attempt to bring it to a close without any need for the nonsense, the repugnant nonsense of the closure motion we had yesterday. But, my Lords, I do wish to bring one point of principle to this House, and I wish to ask this House publicly to determine the matter. And I shall be pressing the amendment. I shall move to a division, my Lords, in which each and every member of this House will publicly have to declare their position on the simple matter, the simple proposition that I put before your Lordships, and that is this, that the Act, which will be an Act when it passes from this House and goes to the other place, should not come into force until the British people have had a chance to decide the matter in a general election. Now, yesterday there was talk that the Labour Party might be accepting a general election, now there isn't, and so on. I'm not really particularly concerned about who said what when. My Lords, I agree with all those who say that somehow we need to bring a conclusion to this matter. And in the history of our great democracy, my Lords, in the times of greatest crisis and doubt, the way in which that is done, has been done, and please God, always will be done, is by recourse to the people, to ask the people of this country to decide the matter in a general election. And yes, my Lords, in a general election, not in some second referendum or a first referendum or a third or a fourth, which is cooked up by a majority of the time with the power to decide the question. Let the people decide who governs. There is plenty of time, my Lords, if the parties stick to the opinions that we were heard, that the leader of the opposition has been saying all around the country, the leader of the Scottish Democrats, Scottish Nationalists has been saying, the leader of my party has been saying, we want an election. There is plenty of time, as we all know, my Lords, to have an election in October, to allow the British people to choose parties which will either pursue the course which is set out in this Act, which would lie on the statute book and could be implemented by a new Secretary of State 1 minute after the formation of a government. Or they may choose a government that wishes to take this country out of the European Union, as the public have been promised on the 31st of October. A general election will enable the people of this country to make that choice, not some cabal in the House of Commons. The people of this country. My Lords, there's some chuckle.
I'm grateful to the Noble Lord. Over the years he's been a member, he regularly has lectured this House about its role in relation to the other place. My Lords, does he really think that this amendment, at this time, for a revising chamber, is at all appropriate?
Absolutely do, my Lords. I think that if there is no purpose in this House, if it is not to enable at some point the rights of the people to be sustained, and indeed the one absolute power of this House, my Lords, deliberate and absolute power of this House, is that it can prevent the House of the Commons extending itself indefinitely. We can require a general election. We can't do in this case, my Lords, after 5 years. That is an absolute power of this House under the legislation passed by this thing. My Lords, I am not stating this House. I am making a submission to this House and through this House to all the parties and to those who support the parties of people on both sides that this matter should be decided by a general election, not by the kind of house of cards shenanigans on one side or the other, and both sides are as bad as each other, if you ask me, trying to do chess moves one against the other. And I totally agree with what was said by the noble Lord Jones earlier. It is doing nothing to advance the credibility of politics. Of course.
The noble Lord for giving way, because I'm examining his amendment, the last phrase of which is following the first general election to take place in 2019. If no such general election takes place, what is the effect of his amendment?
The effect of the amendments, my Lord, is that the Act will not come into place until, I think, until a general election has taken place. Until the general election taken place, I have been advised by...
Forgive me if I didn't make myself sufficiently clear. If there is no general election in 2019, how can this amendment have any statutory effect?
Well, if the noble Lord has just voted for an amendment that we've been told has no statutory effect, so he can vote against one now that he says has no statutory effect. He can have it both ways, my Lords.
My noble friend, but surely what it means is that if there isn't a general election in 2019, the bill will never come into effect.
Well, I would cheerfully welcome that outcome, my Lords. But my Lords, I think that the matter is much simpler, and I think those outside this House will understand where we are. Oh, sorry.
I thank my noble friend for giving way. In asking this question, I'll remind him of the last time that a government went to let the people decide, which was in 1974. It's an interesting parallel he might not wish to follow. But I'll ask the question about the wording in the opposite direction from that of Lord Campbell. And that is, it refers to the first general election of 2019. Are we expecting to have more than one in 2019?
My Lords, the words that are tabled, the House has any opportunity, can use whatever excuse, whatever thing it wants to say to vote down this amendment. I was advised by the clerks on the wording of the amendment, and the purpose of the amendment... My Lords, there are more interruptions.
My Lords, that really is not...
Oh, I'm sorry. Notwithstanding what my noble friend and others have said about the fact the amendment doesn't make sense, the noble Lord's argument is all based on the supposition there can be a general election held before the 17th of October when there's a European Council. And I'm always interested to hear what the noble Lord says because he's got great expertise in these areas. But the
Well, I would. The Independent today is reporting that if the Prime Minister loses the vote on Monday and does not achieve a general election on the 15th of October, the Prime Minister is going to resign his position. Would the noble Lord give us his expertise as to how the provision in this bill telling the Prime Minister to write a letter will apply if we no longer have a Prime Minister?
Lords, like my noble friend Lord Forsyth on a previous amendment, I'm not going to be pursuing the ifs, buts, whys and whats that we have in every newspaper of this country. I return, my lords, to the fundamental point, a point of principle. They can say they're voting against it because it's defective for one reason or another. But it is crystal clear what the purpose of this debate is about and the purpose of trying to put this amendment down. It is said that this bill, to foreclose the leaving of the United Kingdom leaving the European Union on the 31st of October, that decision should not be taken without the sanction of the people. Now, I'm not going to give way to my noble friend. Sorry.
Grateful to my noble friend. I'm most grateful to my noble friend for giving way. Perhaps it would assist the House if one could point out that there has been a general election since the referendum. This bill is about rejecting no deal. And at the general election in 2017, 53.2% voted for parties who were opposed to no deal, 17.1 million people. And only 14.4 million, 45.1% of the electorate, voted for Conservative, DUP or UKIP, who would sanction no deal. So the people spoke then, and in the 2019 EU election, 44.4% voted for the Brexit or Conservative parties, 54.4% voted for parties who were opposed to no deal, which is what this bill is about.
The noble lady should be very confident about supporting my amendment and voting for a general election. My lords, what we have now, when I spoke after the disgraceful closure of the noble lady, Baroness Lady Deitch's amendment, I said that we were now in a situation, and the public know this, the world knows this, that the government is not in control of matters relating to Brexit. Power on matters relating to Brexit rests with a majority in the House of Commons. That majority in the House of Commons is served, perhaps driven, by a group of people, some of whose names appeared on the back of the Commons print of the bill, who are taking decisions, thinking up clever wheezers, and now have put forward a piece of legislation designed to frustrate the will of the people and an act of Parliament passed by this very Parliament that we should leave on the 31st. Who are these people, my lords? We know who the members of the Cabinet are. We know who the Cabinet Secretary is. We know who gives the legal advice to the Cabinet. We know the civil servants involved. Who are the people who meet, who seek to decide the destiny of this country in relation to legislation and in relation to Brexit? Mr. Cummings. Who are those whose names are just the names behind this bill and behind the strategy of the Remainer group in this country? Why are their names? They must be accountable in the same way as the Cabinet is. But, my lords, I believe that those names should both. But I return to the fundamental, basic point. How many times... Sorry.
The noble Lord True. How much more accountable can you be than putting your name to a bill?
Well, if the noble Baroness is telling me that those 6 people are the people who are now the new governing group who are driving Remainer policy, well, that's very interesting, but I rather suspect there are others involved, maybe 1 or 2 of them in this House. And I think that we should know who their names are.
Can I intervene very briefly and ask my noble friend one simple question? Why did he leave out of the list of those who run the country Mr. Dominic Cummings?
Because, my lords, yet again, my noble friend, despite his distinguished Oxford degree, clearly wasn't listening. I was referring to those who are driving who are driving the policy of the Remainer faction, my lords, and the public outside know this to be true, the Remainer faction who are seizing control of the conduct of our affairs without a general election.
I'm grateful, but would he stop using this term, the Remainer faction? He can use the words the no-deal faction if he wishes, but the vast majority of people who voted in the House of Commons the other day, all of whose names are listed, all of whose names are public, voted because they wanted to save this country from going over a precipice. And why should he take upon himself, and this was the point made by the noble Lord Hunt, why should he take upon himself to urge this House, which has no validity in these matters, to seek as effectively to bring to an end a Parliament which still has almost 3 years to run? If the Prime Minister is able to persuade the House of Commons to have a general election, I personally would welcome it. But it is really no business of this House to interfere in that.
My lords, when I see a political faction, I see a political faction, and I will name it. And I name it the Remainer faction. My lords, I will conclude by saying this, and I would like to have concluded some time ago, but I have courteously tried to take many interventions. How many more times are the people of this country, the long-suffering people of this country, going to be asked to take another delay in what they voted for? Whatever may have happened since or then, on March the 29th they were told there has to be a delay. Now in this bill they're told October the 31st isn't enough. There has to be another delay. It's going to be 31st of January 2020. How many times are we going to be told when it comes up to the 31st of January 2020 there has to be another delay? How many times, my lords, are the long-suffering people of this country going to be asked for delay and delay and delay by those who quite patently want only one thing? No, I will not give way. I will not give way, my lords. I've given way many times. How many more times? There is a custom creeping into this House, my lords, which is becoming more and more like the House of Commons, with constant interruptions, constant interventions. I have courteously taken a large number of interventions, and I wish to conclude my remarks, which in this way, and I will repeat what I said, how many more times must the British people be asked to take a delay? How many more times must they tolerate those who wish to change the policy which Parliament has agreed, the vote that Parliament has made that this country should leave the European Union, enacted on the face of the statute book that we should go on the 31st? How much more must we take from those who want this country to remain and want it to stop? My lords, I think there will be a limit to the tolerance of many people in this country, and I beseech all those involved to allow the cleansing balm of a general election, to allow all those who, whatever their views, to put their case to the people. It is the only way, my lords, in which this matter will be resolved, and I would accept wholeheartedly the result of any general election, as I have all through my political career. I've had to accept repugnant results as far as I'm concerned in general elections. That is the essence of our democracy. So, my lords, I beg you, even if it's defective, to give some house room. I don't accept that it's defective, to give some house room to this idea, and I will press this amendment, whatever arguments may be made about it, because I think all those in this House who do not want to allow the British people, who agree with those in the House of Commons who wish to resist a general election, that all those in this House who have that view should march through the lobby and let their names be counted in the face of history.
Proposed in clause 5, page 3, line 39, leave out subsection 5 and insert the words printed on the marshalled list.
would help the House if we're able to curtail this fairly quickly. I think the Noble Lord said at the beginning he was going to press the amendment anyway, so we can't persuade him to withdraw it, which is usually what we try and do. And we could just make a few comments and let Lord Rooker then respond and move on. I will only say about the will of the people. Of course, there's two ways of doing that. There is a general election, and of course there is a second referendum, which I think the Noble Lord has not supported. I will only say two things about this, which is I think it's very close, I'm afraid, to a wrecking amendment. Either it gives to an incoming government, in the first minute, I think the Noble Lord said, the ability to scrap the bill, the Act, because it is by statutory instrument, which this House, by tradition, does never oppose, it would allow by statutory instrument a Secretary of State to tear up this Act. This cannot be the right way to treat an Act, to allow an incoming Secretary of State, without the permission of Parliament, in another bill to turn it up. But the second is even more serious. It is the issue already raised, that if there isn't a general election, then the whole bill doesn't come into act. That seems to me completely a wrecking amendment. And for that reason, I do urge your noble lords that we oppose this amendment.
Well, Lords, I spent 27 years in the other place, so I know a little bit about the problems members have with the table office in the other place, and I can absolutely guarantee this amendment would not be allowed in the House of Commons because it's a textbook wrecking amendment, and I don't propose to say anything else.
My Lords, I've stated my case clearly, and I put that case to the House. I beg to move.
The question is that Amendment 2 be agreed to. As many as are of that opinion will say content. Contrary, not content. Not content. Clear the bar. question is that Amendment 2 be agreed to. As many as are of that opinion will say content. Contrary, not content.
No. Content.
The contents will go to the right by the throne, the not contents to the left by the bar. question is that Amendment 2 be agreed to. My Lords, they have voted contents 28, not contents 283. 7 not contents.
I'm letting them sit down. My Lords, the House will now adjourn to allow amendments to be tabled for third reading. The Public Bill Office will be open to receive amendments for the next 30 minutes. The House will then resume as soon after that as possible. Timings will be displayed on the annunciator. I beg to move that the House do adjourn during pleasure.
Is that the House to adjourn during pleasure? As many as are of that opinion will say content.
Content.
Contrary not content, the contents have it.
Third reading of the European Union Withdrawal Number 6 Bill, Lord Rooker.
My Lords, I beg to move the bill be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be now read a third time. As many of that opinion will say content. Content. The contrary not content. The contents have it.
My Lords, I beg to move this bill do now pass.
The question is that this bill do now pass.
My Lords, in thinking, obviously, everyone who's been here, it has been the most extraordinary experience, but there are some people not in the chamber, to which I think we also should thank. Clearly, those in the Public Bill Office and the Printed Paper Office that have enabled us to deal with this bill in an unusual way, and they have worked along with the doorkeepers above and beyond, I think, the call of duty. For our side, if I can just be personal for a moment, we've had in our office both Dan Stevens on the content and Ben Kaufman keeping our whips together. I know that was bad news for those of you moving amendments, that he's so effective, but from our side, it was great. So I'd like to, use this moment to thank them. Clearly, the work of my noble friends, Baroness Smith and Lord Goldsmith, have been superb over it, and I think the whole House will thank them for what they've been able to do. We thank the Minister, of course, and we're, I think, due to hear from him now.
My Lord, I would just like to second everything that the noble lady Baroness Hayter has said, and just to add my own thanks to all those who have cooperated so well to ensure this bill has been successful, especially the noble Lord Rooker. And I would like to thank my own leader, noble Lord Newby, and my Chief Whip, Lord Stoneham. And I think we've had excellent experience in the passage of this bill.
On behalf of these benches, I'd like to associate myself with the remarks by both of the noble baronesses and pay tribute to the many cross-benchers who have been present throughout these proceedings. To whom I'm particularly grateful. Very cross.
My Lords, can I first of all add my thanks to those expressed by Baroness Hayter and the others, to the staff of the House who have worked incredibly long hours, including quite late last night, to process all of the different stages, amendments, etc. Let me also personally pay particular tribute to my own officials who've also worked extremely late, particularly the legal ones who've had the impossible job of explaining complicated legal constructs to me, a simple engineer, so that I can hopefully communicate them to the House. They have done a sterling job, and I am incredibly grateful. My Lords, the government cannot support this bill. I quite agree with the point made by the noble Lord Viscount Trenchard that this bill brings delay and uncertainty. I would add that it undermines our efforts to renegotiate the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration, and aims to tie the Prime Minister's hands when he is seeking to secure the best possible Brexit deal. However, as I reiterated to the House yesterday, and in line with the assurances made by the Chief Whips in both Houses, if this bill completes its remaining stages, it is the Government's intention that it will be ready to be presented for royal assent. Now, I hope it will be helpful to the House if I respond directly to some of the points that were raised by noble lords earlier throughout the discussion. And I, of course, do recognise that we are now at the third reading stage, so I hope noble lords will forgive me if I take some time to address some of the points. I think some people might want some answers to some of the questions that have been asked, particularly about the government's intentions.
It's not third reading. It's only... if it may help the noble lord, the only sort of dissent there was that we are not at the third reading stage. We are now on the part this bill do now pass.
Apologise. maybe the legal officials didn't explain it to me clearly enough. So I thank the noble lady for her clarification. My noble friends Baroness McIntosh of Pickering and Viscount Hailsham raised concerns about whether the government would request an extension but then vote against an extension in the European Council. Let me reiterate, for the sake of, again, the many times we have stated this, but the government have been clear that we will, of course, adhere to the law. Noble Lords have the text of Clause 1(4) in front of them, and they can see what it requires. The noble Lords Baroness Deach, Lord Forsyth of Drumlene, Lord Lee of Hurley and Baroness Faulkner of Margravine have raised the prospect that the extension could come with conditions. Noble Lords are well aware of my position, which is that the bill, of course, hands powers to the European Union, and it is true that the bill, as drafted, makes no...
I'm most grateful to my noble friend for answering a slightly different question to the one that I put. But the answer I think he would wish to give is, as I understand the legal position, as I think it was the noble Lord Kerr explained earlier, the UK government will actually not be present in the room when the, which was the actual question that I put, that the United Kingdom will not actually veto its own application for an extension. But he would just like to confirm, possibly for the record, that the United Kingdom government will not actually be in the room when the vote is taken. So the situation I asked him to elucidate on would not actually arise.
I thank the noble lady for her question, but she has had the answer that I'm going to give her on this subject. The government will abide by the law, and noble lords have the text of the relevant clause in front of them. And lots of great legal minds can no doubt spend a lot of time advising noble lords of the legal intent of it. As I said, noble Lord Baroness Deach, Lord Forsyth, Lord Lee of Hurley and Baroness Faulkner raised the prospect that the extension could come with conditions. And noble lords do know my position, which is that the bill hands power to the European Union. And it is true that the bill as drafted makes no provision for the event that the EU attaches conditions to that extension. However, during any extension, the UK would remain a member state. Baroness Ludford noted that Article 50 does not give the EU any special power to impose conditions which would cut across those member states' rights. The most important point, however, is that an extension is objectionable in itself because it delays the point at which we can satisfy the will of the people as expressed in the referendum. Now, whilst the previous extension that was agreed in April contained political statements reflecting the EU's expectations of how the UK might act during the extension period, noble lords, having no doubt studied the decision of the European Council at some length, will note that these sat outside the central legally operative provisions of that decision and did not amount to conditions. The phrase quotes, "This extension excludes any reopening of the withdrawal agreement," close quotes, sits in the preamble, not in the decision itself. And that difference is important because it means that this is not a legally binding condition. And of course, it is precisely because there is a difference that the government has been able to reopen the negotiations and is seeking, as noble lords are aware, to remove the undemocratic Northern Ireland backstop. Excuse me. The noble lords Viscount Trenchard and Baroness Deach asked what happens if the EU offers a longer extension when the Commons is not sitting for the next 2 days. Would it be unable to reject it? As a matter of fact, as drafted, the legislation means that the House of Commons cannot reject a longer extension if it is not sitting. The only way to rule out an unacceptably long extension, of course, is to reject the bill, which is why we have opposed it. Finally, my noble friend Lord Forsyth raised questions about the Kinnock Amendment. The House has taken a decision on this, but let me be clear about the government's position. The amendment is confusingly drafted and is contradictory to the aims of the rest of the bill. It says the purpose of an extension is to pass legislation to implement a deal when, under the bill, the extension is only being sought because there isn't an agreement. The Kinnock Amendment's deficiencies are such that its effect is therefore rendered wholly unclear. My Lords, I have detained you long enough. We have... I thought that would get a cheer. We have... touché. We have heard many concerns raised with this bill, but more fundamentally, the issues at play here are not just technical. It is about seriously undermining negotiations that could achieve a deal before the 31st of October, frustrating the referendum result and stopping Brexit.
My Lord, my Lord, my Lord. I shall be genuinely extremely brief. I just want to say that I object strongly both to the bill and the way it's been handled. And I think this is a very, very sad day, both for the country and for our House.
Well, Lords, can I second everything that was said from the two front benches on this side in terms of thanks to everybody. I've just been the messenger from the Commons, really, intervening occasionally because this is unusual circumstances. And I certainly thank everybody who's been involved. I was quite looking forward about 1 a.m. the other day because I'd almost got my second wind. It was just like the old days in the Commons. And then, of course, it all went quiet and packed up. But genuinely, though, I thank everybody who's participated. I have to say, we've rewritten the conventions whilst we're doing this, not the least the speech of 7 minutes we've just heard from the Minister. That should have been made as a statement, or the wind-up of second reading. It was completely inappropriate under the standing or the rules of this House to do it under this bill that now pass. Having got that on my chest, because this is not the end. This is our procedures are going to change as a result of this bill for a start. Things are going to happen differently to what they've done in the past. That may be regrettable, it's true, but precedents have been created during the passage of this bill. Some we may come to regret, but I thank everybody who has participated.
Just to remind the House, the question is that...
Well said, Lord.
That this bill do now pass. As many of that opinion will say content. The contrary not content. The contents have it.
My Lords, I beg the House do now adjourn.
That the House do now adjourn.